Well, welcome. The message today we try to portray to you is actually a simple one. And we try to sort of put it very simply. We are getting what we're here to do. We're getting it done. And we will today basically go through some of the results we have achieved. We will talk through the financial results. I will give you an update on the organizational development of BMC. And we will also talk about some of the operational work we do, i.e. what we're doing on the cases, and then end up with basically portraying a little bit of what's going to happen in the near future. So let me just start with reminding us all maybe what we're here actually to do. What are our strategic long-term goals and what are we set up to actually deliver? And I'd like to context it a little bit. The overall amount of cash money that was paid into the banks in order to remedy the situation caused by the quite astronomical losses in the banks in the past was 3,800 and close to 50 million, 3,850 million. Of that, 200 million was invested into the BMC. And BMC then was able to, on its own, with the state guarantee, issue bonds to take loans for another 1.6 billion in order to buy out the non-performing, the bad assets from the banks in order to improve the bank's operation and give them, instead of these bad assets, we gave them our bonds, which is a very good and high-yielding instrument actually. And this is sort of the situation we're in. Now, that means that we have some obligations to all of us taxpayers here. We should make sure that as much of that money that has been paid in should be returned. And this is really what we're here to do. So our financial long-term objectives is quite simple. First of all, we have to make sure that we, with the assets we have, we manage them and generate enough cash so we can pay back the 1.6 billion of debt we have issued with a state guarantee. Otherwise, future generation will have to pay for that, and this is not something we'd like to participate and do. That money has to be returned. The second point is that we also have a requirement to pay back the 200 million that was invested into BMC. That's the equity. And we also have an obligation to return that money with some interest, with a return obligation. That's the two financial objectives. We also have assets now, which are important for the restructuring and recovery of the economy. So our obligation is also to intensively manage our assets and making sure that we create value of these bad assets. This is why we do the from bad to good. We have to take care of these assets, transform them from something which is actually bad to something which is good and attractive, which we can optimize the value, and in the end liquidate those to generate cash so we can pay back the money that the taxpayers has put into this. And we also have an obligation where it's economically justifiable to restructure and improve the business that we're exposed to. So these are sort of the long-term strategic goals. And it's not more complicated than that, but it's actually quite a lot of work to do that. As part of the last year, there has been quite a lot of work also in order to, I would say, put in place a more detailed, what you call key performance indicators. So the activities of BMC can be monitored and tracked and followed up on some, I would say, more hard measures, some financials that we are reporting on. Actually, part of this we're reporting monthly to our owner, major stakeholders. And I just want to guide you to them. I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but these key performance indicators, they're covering, first of all, the cash we generate, i.e. how much do we actually generate in cash out of the assets that we have taken over. And this is the money that can be used then for paying down the debt and eventually to return the equity as well. So that's actually the most important key performance indicator we have. The next set of key performance indicators relate to our profitability. We have a profitability requirement on BMC. We should actually generate more value than we cost. And I think actually that's a good obligation. Whatever cost we take on, we should be able to generate more value out of that and return that. So we should not, in the overall, when we're sort of closing the books in BMC, we shouldn't have cost the taxpayers anything. We should have returned more than that in terms of the value we create here. And one of the things that has been tracked is, of course, our operational cost. And as you see on this slide, we have an operational cost which is below 1% of the assets we have under management. And that is actually considered to be very cost effective when you consider the scale and scope of what we are doing here. I know this is debatable, and we can always argue about some of the specific cost items, but in the grand scheme of things, we are now set up in a way which is actually quite cost effective given what we have to do and what we have to deliver on. And then the last set of the criteria relates actually to returning the funds. And there we are, of course, in the early days of BMC yet. We have the first sort of refinancing event coming up in December, and we will come back to that a little bit more. If I would comment some of the numbers here, the cash generated, we are today sort of focusing a little bit on the result for 2014, but to update you all on where we are actually as of half year 2015 also, we are now approaching, we're very close to 20%. I think we're tallying up 19% plus, and in money it's 311 million that has been generated so far from the assets we have. And when it comes to the profitability, we are for 2014 posting a net profit. We had a net loss last year, so if you look at the aggregate for the 13 to 14, we have a net profit on roughly 30 million so far. That translates into return on equity for the 2 years of approximately 16. But Marco will actually tell you that we are extremely leveraged. So even a small impact on the values of the total assets have a huge, I would say, consequence on the return we have on equity. So you have to expect there will be swings, and we have to look at this over a longer period and also look at it where we actually generate at the end of the, I would say, the total task we have. So expect that to be up and downs over the years to come because of our high leverage. Now, what have we then done so far if we look back? I think we've spent quite a lot of time talking about sort of that we have taken over assets already from 6 banks. We took them in, we have reviewed them, we have organized it, and we have made sure that we are now operational and working on the 563 cases. There used to be 577, but some of these cases we have closed and now, but we continue to work on them, and I'll get back to describe that a little bit more. We now have an effective and value optimizing decision making here with a pretty robust way of how we do that, and it's well documented. And also we have a good cooperation with the MPU, because as you know, we have a specific role here. And to give you a little bit of, I would say, meat to the bone here, how much work is this really? Well, we sort of had a look. When it comes to the actual documentation we took in, the 577 files we took in for the beginning, it relates to some 1.2 million of documents. And if you would pile them up, our pile of papers would be 120 meters high. This is just to give you a sense of the amount of documentation that we have sort of gone through, turned that into, for each and every one of the cases, into an action plan which covers basically not only one road forward, but actually different options. And we have assessed the value outcomes of these different options, and using that, we have a very realistic value of what we think we can actually return. So this is sort of what we've been doing during this time. I would say the other part here, we have gone from being 12 people in the beginning of 2014 to being today 96, and the major thrust was of course done during 2014 when the organization grew from 12 to a little bit more than 80 people. Now, that means a lot of recruiting, sure, but it also means a lot of integrating and making sure that the teamwork around this works and organizing that and getting it done. And we had to do that while actually delivering the results. When it comes to then making sure that we are not sort of an upstart or an early organization, that we actually are a robust and I would say credible institution, we have invested quite a lot of, I would say, effort, time to make sure that we have incorporated the findings and the concerns that the Court of Audit have and the CPC had, in order to make sure that we now have very well documented and I would say robust decision-making procedures. We have a very, I would say, extensive policy catalog that guides how we're doing things here. And even though that we might have a different opinion with some of these institutions, Court of Audits and so on, which we have talked about that before, we've taken the approach that we constructively try to address all the concerns and the risks they have pointed out to make sure that we do that in the best possible way. We have sort of done the formal requirements, responded on the formal matters, but that's not the main point. We have sort of continued beyond that, because we are now we set up a task force together with CPC in order to make sure that we extract out of their experience the best Slovenian demonstrated practice, so we can implement that in BMC. And we're also working with an international certification institute to extract the international best demonstrated practice. And hopefully we can even at one point hopefully get the certification that we are recognized for being a very robust and compliant organization. This is the ambition. We should not only be adequate, we should be better than that. When it comes to the cooperation we have with the MPU and our obligation according to, I think, Article 7 in the SUXP and I think Article 11 in our regulations, we have to also report on any suspicions we find in the credit maps that we have taken over. And also as we work with the cases, if we find any suspicions of criminal activities, we have to report on that. So far, we have, our employees, when they're reviewing this, have found suspicions in 23 cases as of, I think, last week. This is in addition, I would say, to the 90 cases that we took over where the banks already, even before we took over, had found suspicions and are investigating with the police, or actually the police, of course, investigating this. And then we have actually 5 cases where we have taken one more step. We see signs of what we think is actually criminal activity, but we are letting an outside attorney have a look at that to understand basically more the correct basis for pressing charges on that. So here also we have a very good cooperation with the police directorate in order to make sure that we are compliant with that and doing that. I just want to remind you that actually the credit maps that we took over does not include what I think some people would have expected or hoped. There is no email conversations from the past, there is nothing else. It's purely the documents which relate to the credit maps, and quite frankly the banks have all that information also, since they are required to keep it, and they of course have more documentation around what's going on. So in the end, the best actual source for doing a review of a case in the end would have to be the banks that gave the loans, unfortunately. But you know, we're trying to be as compliant and open and transparent as we can, and we certainly, as soon as we see anything, we will report it, as is our obligation. We also are quite, I would say, active on our operations, and I will let actually Micha and Tanya talk more about that, but we are now seeing the first successful restructurings coming. And even though that we're still not a major real estate owner, we are actively also trying to address that by helping to optimize the value, even if we don't own the real estate at this point, even if it's still sort of collateral held in the bankruptcies, for instance. We have, as an example, launched already this real estate webpage where, for instance, you can search for real estate if you're interested in buying it, and you can find also what we don't own but actually is in the bankruptcy trustees' hands so far. But we're getting more and more active also on this sector, and the role here has been to make sure that we are a long-term and serious player and that we don't cause any major, I would say, disturbances to the real estate pricing in this country, because that would have also a very negative effect. We have to be a big and serious player in that field. We today have also a pretty clear direction. A massive intake, building up of an organization. At the same time, you have to sort of do work on the restructuring and also plan for the future. It is complex, but we've done it, and we have done a strategic plan that covered the 2014 to 2017 as per the actually current valid legislation. But we have also worked through and have, for the discussion the next board meeting, the strategic plan that sort of addresses the 2015 to 2022 as well. So we set our direction, and we are pretty clear in terms of what we should do and roughly timing-wise how we will do that. And also thinking through what type of resource we have to build up and then eventually ramp down as sort of the mandate of BMC in the end goes up and then expires. And I think the last point here is that we are generating the financial results, and I'll actually let Marco talk you through that. The results are good, but we should not sort of overemphasize sort of short-term results. We are here for completing the full mandate, and I think the way I read this is that we are now on track to deliver that. So I can say that we're getting it done. Let's not sort of extrapolate too much of results that are done in only 1 year, but they are good so far, and it's an indication that we are on track. I think when it comes to cash generation, yes, it's money and it's sort of only one part of it, but I think also with some of these transactions we've done during this year, we have helped actually to make sure that some of the people that are investing that has money from abroad but also in Slovenia know that we are a reliable and transparent seller. And when it comes to some of the transactions we have of selling credits, i.e. loans, you can say that actually the transactions we've done has created a market for it in Slovenia. And I think it's tremendously helpful if there are investors that can help with the unburdening that we all here in this room as taxpayers actually are carrying out now for covering the losses from the past.